is 1:30 sharp on my clock, which means it's go time. You ready to rock and roll?
Let's do it.
Let's get this party started. Welcome to the smartest people in the room. We are so glad that you are here with us, and just by showing up, you are already demonstrating your very own smarts. Today, we are pleased to explore what the world of live events are going to look like post-pandemic. And we'll be doing so via two distinct viewpoints, one from the USA and one from Europe. One from a very large promoter standpoint and the other from a new live event streaming platform standpoint. The combination of these two viewpoints is going to be fantastic. Before we get started, let me take care of some business. First, to the audience, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat window. The reason we do these webinars is twofold. First, we want to showcase really smart people in the amazing work they do day to day in the industry. But the second reason is a bit more nuanced. Most of you know that I am a music industry headhunter. I place music executives in roles throughout the industry. So by definition and function, I help people connect with companies. In this series, my goal is to help you make more connections, and I invite you to take full advantage of that opportunity. Specifically, I invite you to engage with the speakers and the other attendees in the chat of the Zoom. Please introduce yourselves, share your LinkedIn profile, say hello to your friends, and make some new ones. And please ask questions of our speakers. We will try to address as many of those as possible during the interview. Also, please make sure your chat is set to address speakers and attendees. I want to thank our program sponsors, for without their support, we could not keep this free. I want to thank First Horizon Bank, Bufkin Baker, Four Roses Bourbon, the Fairlane Hotel, the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, Lightning 100, Tennessee Brew Works, Moo TV, Jive Printing, Project Music, and Cushmaster's brand of CBD products. So let's get down to business. In today's host seat, we welcome Maarten Walraven. Connection, strategy, and leadership are three terms that define Maarten. He's the co-editor of Music X, a newsletter about music, tech, and innovation. He works with a musical theater company called Lead House to promote the classical art song, and he also works at Stingray with a specific focus on classical music and jazz. And he's starting a new live stream studio and live music discovery platform called Garden. Maarten is a strong believer in flipping the value relation between artist and fan by finding ways for the latter to directly pay the former. And I can't wait to hear all about it today. Welcome, Maarten. So glad you're with us.
Thanks for the introduction, Tom.
And joining Maarten as today's featured guest is Angela Wong. In her role at AEG Presents, Angela leads VIP and premium ticket initiatives for global tours such as Blake Shelton, JoJo Siwa, and Dan and Shay. Previously, she's held VIP initiatives around Justin Bieber, Ariana Grande, and more with fan engagement startup Backstage, acquired by Endeavor. Prior to her career in music, Angela was a super fan of American Idol and So You Think You Can Dance, and an active member of online fan communities. Today, she gives back to the nonprofit a cappella music world as a revenue manager for the Contemporary A Cappella Society of America, also known as CASA. Please welcome these two amazing rock stars to the smartest people in the room. Take it away, Maarten.
Yeah, thanks again for these very pleasant introductions, Tom. And yeah, we're very happy to be here. We'll be kind of trying to have a conversation instead of like a straight interview. So there will be some more back and forth maybe than in some of the other ones many of you will have seen before. We're gonna just briefly introduce ourselves, and we do this by asking a question, and that question is, how did you get where you are, Angela?
It's a great question to start with, and thank you, Tom, for the very kind introduction. So as Tom mentioned in my bio, long before I had a career in music, I started off as a super fan myself. In my high school formative years, I was a super fan of American Idol and So You Think You Can Dance. I was very active in the forums and online communities, and that's where I actually learned how to do a lot of graphic design, which led me to pursue advertising in university. So with that sort of backdrop, it wasn't until my very first internship in music with Scooter Braun at Scooter Braun Projects, where I fully delved into the world of music. So since then, I had worked with APA agency in tour marketing on the booking side of things. And then following that, I had a stint at Backstage working on VIP experiences there, which brings me to today at AEG, where we're working on premium ticketing, the VIP and the platinum side of things. So super excited to talk with you all today. It's a good sign. It means that concerts are on the horizon. I just went through an on sale myself last week. So it's looking positive out there that we'll be able to go to a show.
And that was your first on sale in more than a year.
Yes, it was. And it went very well. And Maarten, I guess I'll kick it over to you. Can you tell us how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, so I'm in the Netherlands and had a brief stint in the UK where I did a PhD in history at the University of Manchester. And while history may sound very far from music, my PhD was about sound. So it was about how sound had an impact on the new development of new technologies, the influence of sound on the way people created community, on the way people created conflict with each other, all of this in the sort of late 19th, early 20th century in urban areas like Manchester in Europe. But yeah, universities are slow moving institutions, and I was also keen to do something else. So then I got a job at a TV channel called Brava, which is a classical music TV channel, and Jazz TV, which is a jazz music TV channel. So then I got into media and more properly working in music. These channels were then bought by Stingray, and I've been having a very good time at Stingray for the past 6 years, trying to grow everything we do, you know, being in the fast-paced environment that is media and TV business. When I started out, everything was about linear television. Then everything was about subscription video on demand. Now everything is about free ad-supported streaming television. And all of this changes every other year. So that's great. I started the newsletter Music X together with Bas last year as Music X Corona. And now my new venture is Garden, which is a live streaming studio and live music discovery platform. So that's kind of where I am at.
Yes. I also want to mention that the way that Maarten and I got connected was through an amazing community called Water and Music, run by Sherry Hu, an incredible researcher, writer, who runs a community through Patreon. And Maarten and I actually got connected on Discord. So that's how this all started, actually months ago. So
Yep.
This has been a few months in the making.
And Sherry is indeed phenomenal, Drew.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's networking in a nutshell, isn't it? So what I would like to kick us off with is to ask you, Angela, about premium ticketing. That's what you do right now at AEG. This kind of drops down into VIP ticketing and platinum ticketing. And while I think maybe some people have some understanding of this, it would be great if you could just dive into that a bit more and explain how that works.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start off with the VIP side. I think with VIP packaging, that's probably what most folks are familiar with. So when we talk about premium ticketing, it's essentially a two-pronged approach. So when we think about premium, it's any ticket that's sold at a price point that's, you know, above what you would call your face value. So for VIP packages, I'm sure people are familiar with different offerings, including, you know, exclusive merchandise and sometimes a meet and greet with your favorite artist, different levels of involvement to give the fan a sort of elevated, closer experience to the artist beyond just the ticket to the show. So yeah, VIP is super important from a fan perspective when, you know, especially now in COVID times, prior to COVID, you know, there were these opportunities to have more access in person with, you know, these artists and these performers. But, post-pandemic, it's going to be interesting to see that come back. And I think there's definitely a demand, and, people want that again, because, connection is so important and key to what we do. On the platinum side, it's very interesting because when we talk about platinum, it's also important to talk about the secondary market. And, we all know there is an entire industry of ticket brokers. And, with any major on sale, you can see that when tickets go on sale for a hot show, within minutes, you may see those tickets on, these secondary broker sites. And what platinum ticketing enables event promoters to do, and artists as well, is to price tickets more according to what the market demands. So what the market can bear. And what we see in terms of strategy is, the tickets within the first given rows of any section, those are generally the ones that can, that support paying a premium. So what it enables us to do on the event side is price more according to demand dynamically, kind of similar to what you would see in the airline industry or the hotel industry, where, during peak seasons, you might see pricing change according to the demand there. So that's sort of a general overview of the two sides, and super interesting to kind of be talking about this again. I'm excited to share more about it as we talk.
Yeah, I like the analogy to the airline industry, because it may, when I fly, I used to fly a lot. When I fly, I'm happy to pay a little bit extra to give me like extra leg space, and all that sort of stuff. Whereas when I go to a concert, I don't necessarily have that, but I know that in my friend groups, there's tons of people who would happily pay extra to stand at the front or to get their beer extra and stuff like that. And that's that VIP ticketing side of things, right? If you get some extras, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I think other than artist-specific VIP packaging, you can also look at places like Vegas, where they offer VIP packages of all kinds, whether it's, a table with drinks, or sometimes dinner and, dinner and a show, things like that. Like you said, people are willing to pay a premium for, comfort and to make the experience the best experience it can be.
Yeah, so that's really kind of an artist-focused, a fan-focused thing, actually, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, well, it's of course also about maximizing revenues. The other thing, the platinum ticketing thing, is much more focused on like maximizing revenues, which in the end also goes to the artist, of course, but it's a very different dynamic. And I know that in our in our talk beforehand, I gave one example, which is quite recent. So last year I was going to go to Tom York, the singer of Radiohead. I'm sure everybody knows here. And I was too late to get tickets. So I got them on a secondary website. And I bought them at like 10 euros above the face value price. And I really checked, because I don't like scalpers. I hate them, actually. And so I checked, and I was like, this is a real person, an actual person. So I paid him the money. And then, of course, the concert got canceled when it was first postponed. Then it got canceled. And then I got my money back. And it turned out that this person wasn't a person, but a company that is just a professional third-party seller of tickets, right? And for the platinum ticketing, that's really what you're trying to prevent.
Exactly. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm glad you shared that personal example. I'm sure I'd be curious to hear in the chat who might have had similar experiences. But I also want to mention that I think when it comes to ticketing, there's a shift in mindset from fast ticketing to a slow ticketing yield management approach. So I think prior to technologies like this enabling this level of control, if a show sold out within minutes, from a promoter perspective, it's like, oh my goodness, amazing. Like, we did it. We sold out the show within minutes. Great. But now I think the mindset around that is more so, if that does happen, oh, maybe we were priced incorrectly. So if a ticket is able to sell at a higher price within the market, then that's something that artists and event producers should be able to participate in. Because, as we see on these secondary sites, sometimes these tickets go for like $400 or $500 plus percent over face, you know, hundreds,
Yeah.
thousands of dollars. So that's really the motivation behind, you know, the strategy. And ultimately it's, you know, bringing back, you know, those revenues to the artists and to the event producers.
Yeah, and that can only be a good thing. How do you, or not, maybe not how, but it's like, do you think there's any changes? Like, did last week give you a feeling for any changes that are afoot post-pandemic, or has anything been accelerated? We've seen many things accelerate, like live streaming. What about this ticketing? Has the strategies around that been affected by being more than a year of nothing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I will say going into it, the mindset was, you know, anything could happen. You know, we're going to prepare for a lot of activity and a lot of traffic, but we don't know what to expect until it actually happens. No one really has a crystal ball to see what the demand looks like. I will say that we did, as AEG, we also produce, we work locally with some of our regional offices. So here in LA, one of my favorite venues, the Greek Theater, has started to announce some shows for fall, for November, around that time frame. And one of my favorite artists, Krungbin, they announced a show, and similarly, the demand was there. Like within the first few days of the pre-sale and the on-sale, they went into, so one sold out show rolling into a second one. So I had an indication that there was going to be good demand. It's just when it comes to, a bigger full scale, like multi-date tour, you never know exactly how it's going to perform, but overall it's been very positive. So I think it was more about getting back into the swing of things. It's been over a year since we've done this, but hey, it's sort of like riding a bike. We can get back on and we know how the mechanics work. And
yeah, and fans are kind of waiting to like press F5 until ticket sales start, right?
Yes.
We love doing that. Yeah.
I used to be really good at that, actually. I used to be have multiple tabs open and multiple devices. I'm trying to remember which show it was for, actually. But yes, I've definitely been there.
Awesome. Yeah, I see some people in the chat who are going to gigs in the fall. So that's a positive thing. Or back in 2014. It's also cool if you went to a gig back in 2014, of course, which you got tickets for. Yeah. So what about sort of other post-pandemic things like restrictions that could be in place at concerts? Is that something that is going to go into like premium style ticketing, or is there going to be a fast lane for people to do like rapid tests, or is there going to be a fast lane for people to, I don't know, stuff like that?
It's a great question. Based on what I'm seeing so far, and just as sort of from a fan perspective, not being directly involved in those decisions, but it's really different regionally from geographic location to other location. In Denver currently for Red Rocks, they had just received approval from local government to open up with pod style seating. So right now they're doing, I believe it's like somewhere between like a quarter of the capacity of the full venue, but each pod has like 4 to 8 seats, kind of similar to what Tom had mentioned. He was going to a pod show later on this year. So it's really different per region, I think, because, as we've, from a US perspective, as we've sort of seen through the pandemic, it has been more locally driven what the restrictions end up being. That being said, for fall, it looks like, so far the plans are for full scale touring to return. I think from what I've seen and from what I've heard in, various discussions, I've been in like various clubhouse rooms where they talk about, what touring is going to look like. And there's a lot of those, which are great. Some priorities, of course, having a lot of hand sanitizing wash stations, super important, very accessible. Having those be accessible throughout venues is going to be something that, I would think local venue representatives will be focusing on. And then other ways of limiting like individual contact points, whether it's paperless ticketing, or, what does it look like to pre-order your food and drink? So then when you show up, you can just pick it up and then be good to go and have less, opportunities for, gathering in larger groups. So I think those are some of the things that I'm observing out there. Other than that, we are seeing more festivals for summer 2021 on the calendar. So I think eyes will be on some of the earlier ones to see how things run there. But yeah, I think by fall, with vaccinations in progress and progressing as well as they are in the US, I think by fall we'll feel some sort of normalcy. Kind of, you look at New Zealand, you look at places like Singapore, Taiwan, where they are doing full concerts again, no masks, inside, outside, sort of the light at the end of the tunnel. I think, by that point, at least stateside, we can start to feel like, yes, a concert with some sort of normalcy, and, masks will likely be, encouraged, but by that point in time, we'll see whether they're a requirement or not.
Yeah, yeah. And so you mentioned the international world a little bit there, so I'm gonna go into that, because I mean, having been writing about this for more than a year now, you kind of see the same themes come back all the time. I mean, I've been wanting to move to New Zealand for almost a year now because,
You and me both.
they nailed it in terms of locking down their island. But yeah, they had a big stadium tour, right? There was a band that did six stadium tours, 20, 30,000 people each time. Everything was fine. Do you see that happening in the sort of closed confines of the USA, which is much, much bigger already? Or maybe
Well,
just in California, like Jessica was asking in the chat.
Sure. Well, I think you can look at some markets where they are doing some events. So I can speak to Florida specifically, where I have a show, an outdoor show coming up in May, in the first week of May. And yeah, these outdoor amphitheaters are starting to do shows again. And from a consumer perspective, I've noticed that when these days when you go online to purchase a ticket, right away, you'll see some sort of disclaimer regarding COVID. And I think that disclaimer from a legal standpoint is sort of a, not the promoter or ticketing company letting, folks know that when you agree to buy a ticket, you're assuming, the chance of potentially, any risk involved with regard to COVID. So I've been noticing that more on that front. When it comes to the tours that I'm involved with, it's more, at a certain point, I think the decision comes between, does it make sense to do these one-off shows in markets where it is more open, or does it make more sense to wait until most of the US is at least in a similar place? And I think the answer is the latter. From what I've seen is, when it comes to putting a tour together, it's not only, the cost of one show, but it's the cost of, travel, carrying all of the equipment, the staff, the tour buses, lodging, etc. So I think, I've heard it described as a dial, like it'll start to slowly turn, but the way I'm seeing it now, it feels more like a flip of a switch. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see, but I think by fall, I'm seeing a lot of new shows come up on the calendar.
Yeah, there's a question from David that since you were talking about Florida, we might as well address right away. It's about the plans that Ticketmaster announced a couple of months ago about proof of vaccination, so about like vaccination passports. And there's a proposed legislation against requiring this in Florida, and whether this will affect ticketing companies' efforts to enforce this. Is that something you can address?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think just speaking from my own personal perspective, and at least what I'm seeing currently with some of the events that have already gone on, I'm not seeing this level of stringent requirement around things like vaccine passports and the like. Maarten, I know you mentioned you went to a show this week where they had rapid testing on site. But as far as I've seen, it's more so, masks and, hand sanitizing and, enforcing, social distancing within the venues by, scaling down on capacities. I remember when Ticketmaster announced that story, and it created a big stir because, there are a lot of considerations around that, with regard to privacy and, HIPAA regulations around medical information. So, it sounds like they are equipping themselves with the capabilities, but whether or not it's rolled out, I think it'll be up to the, the promoters and the artists to determine if that's something that they want to put in place.
Yeah. I mean, I was joking today with my cousin who has been vaccinated that if we were to go to like Israel together right now, he would be totally fine to do anything he wanted. I would have to go into quarantine, right? So there's all those little things that could come up in relation to that sort of thing. I'm personally not that sure of vaccination passports in general. I wrote a piece about them about 5-6 weeks ago, and in the course of researching it, I was like, this is not going to work. It's just it's just a shame. I think you're right in that we will just see, that some restrictions will be in place, and then at some point we'll cry herd immunity because of vaccinations, and at least on a local level we'll be able to do stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I see there's a question from, I think, Silky. She's asking about what's the vaccination progress in the Netherlands?
The Netherlands. Yeah. We're kind of in the middle of everybody. And, I think in the US you call it Johnson & Johnson, but of course it's called Janssen, and it's actually Dutch. But the company who's producing it in the US is called Johnson & Johnson. There's some issues with that one, with thrombosis as well, like AstraZeneca. If we get it, if the EMA, if the European Council of Medical Association is going to approve it, then we should be on track. But if it's not, then we'll be really behind because we bet really heavily on that as a country.
Yeah, I'm curious, as part of the European Union, are you seeing it more, each country has their own strategy, or is there any sort of collaboration between members of the union?
There is some collaboration, but they're mostly just doing what they think is best. And yeah, I mean, it's really a national endeavor. It would have been much better if it would have been a proper European endeavor. That's my personal opinion. Yeah, so we're going to switch it around a little bit. So one of the things that I was really excited about is when I kind of met Angela on Discord, and I knew what she was doing, is to draw a parallel between the premium ticketing and something that has become really, really popular, especially over the past year, is this, what I like to call the flipping of the value relationship between artist and fan. Artists putting up their Patreons or, similar things, OnlyFans, you name it. In the Netherlands, we have our own. It's called Petje Af. That sort of style of like tiered working, people who pay more, get more style thing, that's really something that's been going on in ticketing for quite a while. How do you kind of see those parallels?
It's super interesting. Well, I think the most immediate parallel is the fan base, like who is most interested in things like that. So if somebody is really engaged with an artist online in these digital communities, you can, easily correlate that they would also be interested in something like a VIP experience or some in-person elevated experience to get closer to an artist. So, just thinking back to, being at backstage as a fan engagement company, the whole premise was, what does a 20th 21st century fan club look like? From your, your physical, you receive your membership card in the mail and you have, meetings, street teams, things like that. What does that look like in the age of social media? So, within Backstage, it was a mobile app where fans could join, the hub of their favorite artists and connect with other like-minded people. And then within that, ecosystem, it was a natural way to market VIP experiences when they came on sale. So, fast forward to today in 2021, we're seeing more of that in sort of the subscription model with Patreon, as well as regular streaming from artists, whether it's fully produced concerts or whether it's an artist on Twitch who streams regularly and shows their process. I think that's sort of flattened the model for a lot of independent artists to connect with fans in a way that is more one-to-one versus one-to-many. So that's super cool. I also saw someone in the Q&A mention NFTs, which I'm sure we can talk about at length. But NFTs, for those who aren't as familiar, have been blowing up the last few months. Maarten and I were talking about it. I feel like there's a new drop every day now, it seems, and we're just about to, it's cresting at the moment, not quite, at the peak. But I think the reason why NFTs are very interesting for music specifically is, in a world where touring has been on pause, this has been a sustainable way for artists to generate revenue and to, make up some of what they had lost from not having toured. So, we can talk about that at length, but I think when it comes to ways to engage with fans, there are just so many channels to do so now that we couldn't have imagined 10 years ago.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, I mean, NFTs are definitely going to be a part of the fan strategy for a lot of artists, I think. I think in the end, you'll see that where, like with subscriptions, what you do is you provide more value to the artist. And if you play the NFT game right, you can sit that one on top of it, and the NFT will actually give the fan access to the artist. Yeah. That's sort of what the most interesting things. That's like when Blau did his big NFT drop where he made millions. That was the big one, right? Making a song with him. So those are the things where I think, yeah, that's actually something new. Or alternatively, if it's not a one-on-one token, a one-of-one token, then it's a one of many, and you can do very many interesting things with that, including concert experiences.
Yes. Yeah, yep. I think it's an interesting experimental time with NFTs because there's the technology itself, which, once you wrap your head around it, it's like, okay, this makes sense. It's, digitized on the blockchain as a way to, identify, legitimacy. But I'm curious to see more ideas evolve in that space around how do we, other than having the piece of paper, or not even piece of paper, the, digital piece of paper receipt that says you own something, how does that translate to real life? And I think we're starting to see sort of more experimentation with that. I remember seeing, do you remember seeing that Kings of Leon, I think they were releasing an album as an NFT, yes. Something like that. So things like that. And I'm curious about
the most expensive one included a lifetime front row seat at every concert you might want to attend.
Yeah, forever. Stuff like that. Yeah. That's wild. Yeah, things like that. And I'm also curious, a question I have is around fan adoption. Like, what is the level of awareness among most fans around this? Is it cool? Do they recognize that it's valuable? Or is it mostly, people who are very into crypto, who, kind of more speculative investing type of purchasers? Because I don't really know the answer to that question.
It's definitely the latter for now.
Sure.
I mean, yeah. There's a Dutch DJ called Don Diablo, who's been big in the crypto community. Yes, Trudy, I agree.
Yes.
NFTs are confusing to most fans at the moment. But yeah, he buys a lot of NFTs, and then he sold, ostensibly the first concert NFT, which was sold for 600 Ethereum, which is a lot of money, of course. But basically you get a little USB stick sent to your house with the concert on it. You plug it into your computer and you can see it. And then you cannot host a party and charge for it and stuff like that. It's like buying a DVD. Yeah. Anyway, that's not really what we're here to discuss, even though it's super interesting. But it does, allow us to talk about fan strategies, which we do want to discuss. Where this kind of talk about NFTs talks, mentions, it goes into like the value you present to fans. And we were talking about how, authenticity is super important there. And maybe you can share some insights into that, some examples maybe.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, this was a theme that we had talked about, and it's super important, I think, if we all think about something that we are really passionate about, whether it's, for me at age 14, Idol, or so you think, things like that. I always felt most connected to those singers or those dancers when I felt an authentic connection with them. So the way that translates, at least on the VIP side of things, is when building out these experiences, it's really important to have that plan with the fan in mind. Like, what is it that they're going to find valuable, and then work your way from there. Of course, there are, revenue considerations, financial considerations, what pricing makes sense is also super important, for VIP, especially because those prices are static in nature as opposed to dynamic, like the platinum side. But with a VIP experience, I think from every single touch point, it's important to think about what is going to be most authentic to the artist and to fans. So there's so many, let's see a file sharing thing. Okay, got to side chat distracted for a second. So when it comes to building out an experience, like it's really important to have, of course, having that, back and forth between the artists, that collaboration is super important. And with every touch point, you can really build out an authentic experience. For example, for Blake Shelton's VIP, we put together a lounge called the BSers Lounge. His fans are known as the BSers, as Blake Shelton. And one of his favorite foods is queso dip, so your nacho cheese dip. So with every show that we went to, there was a Blake's, queso dip in there that you could have, as well as, the voice chair that you could sit in and take a picture. So all these things that speak to the different, facets of an artist, because, as we've seen with a lot of these like large A-list artists is, there is the music itself, but these artists also have their own brand and personality that go along with, what makes people a fan of them. So it's important to really consider all those things. For me, the thing that I, don't love to see is, you take a simple like drawstring bag and just throw a logo on there. Like, there are so many exciting things you can do in the world of merchandising as well. Actually, I'll share this with you. Over the last couple of days, I tuned into Clubhouse, and the BTS Army actually does Clubhouse meetings. They do like regular meetings. Yeah, they have a club on there, and they'll talk about, new releases or, different, news and goings on within that community. And the fans there, I mean, I consider myself part of the Army as well, but sort of not as, active, but it was super cool to be a fly on the wall and listen to what they care about, because they were talking about, some of their frustrations with merchandise with regard to shipping timelines, since we know COVID has sort of flipped that upside down. But they were also suggesting ideas for merch that they would want. So they were saying cool ideas like it would be great to have a BTS planter or like a bonsai tree or like something that like is gardening specific, because I think one of the members is into gardening and I didn't know that. I watched music videos and like love the music, but it was really cool to hear them sharing that kind of thing of like, oh, it would be cool to have this and that. And if I were the merch company, I would want to tune into those meetings to get those ideas because they're already talking about it. So, that goes back to that authenticity and really understanding what the fans value.
Yeah, exactly. And that's of course comes really close to what you need to do online, right? So you have to be authentic and you have to think for what the fan wants. And I was just curious. So, hypothetically speaking, if Blake Shelton would do a live stream and you would pay like $20 to get access and you would pay $200 and you would get the queso dip sent to your house, right? That sort of thing. That would be cool.
That would be interesting. When we talk about hybrid events, it's funny you mentioned the food because I don't know if you follow a lot of these. It's more I think in like the YouTuber space, but I think there's a YouTuber, I don't want to get his name wrong, but he started this, he basically opened a burger pop-up that was nationwide, and he had partnered with local restaurants to sell burgers, and he made an app called Mr. Burger that was the #1 app in the App Store. Mr. Beast, thank you, Robin.
Mr. Beast, yeah.
Yeah, so Mr. Beast Burger, and the demand was like huge. Like people were going wild after these burgers, and it ended up, quality control was, something that ended up coming up as a concern. But it's super interesting to see what creative ways content creators of all kinds are doing to have that extra level engagement. So yeah, I think something like that, if they did it correctly and had, strategic partners locally and could handle whatever demand came along with it, I think that'd be really cool.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, when talking about a German rapper with an own pizza brand. I mean,
yeah. Oh, I have another example too. Want? Yeah, that sounds great. Another example recently was Emo Night, which is based out of LA. They did a chicken sandwich, like an Emo Night chicken sandwich. And similarly, demand was through the roof, and they had to sort of shut down sales because, demand was so high. And for me, just on a personal note, I've always, food is another thing I'm very passionate about in addition to music. So I've always talked about how if I were to go into the food business and open a restaurant, like I think either burgers or chicken sandwiches would be really successful. So you have those two case studies as perfect examples of that.
I love Freddie Gibbs, by the way. So, and of course, the hybrid event thing is something that I really want to touch upon here. Where do you see this going? I mean, we've seen, Live Nation acquiring Veeps, the live streaming platform, and getting turnkey solutions for live streaming into venues. We see Save Our Stages has done it already with like 20 odd venues across the US earlier. This is happening not just in the US, but everywhere else. I'm coming from a classical music background. This has been going on in classical music for a very long time. People installing cameras in their venues, et cetera, et cetera. How do you see this kind of hybrid event developing?
Yeah, it's a really great question, an interesting topic. Just from my sort of personal perspective, I think, if it were me making those decisions, it sounds like they're equipping certain venues with those capabilities. And I don't know if it makes a ton of sense to film every single show on a tour, but if it's a Friday night or a Saturday night, I think if the idea is to stream it live during the event, I think that would be my preference as sort of from an event producer perspective. Another thing too is that we talked about is, making the stream not just a single angle of, here's the show from the balcony kind of thing. And, we were already starting to see that, I think you mentioned that the plan is to have different camera angles and for the fan to have some level of control of what they see. Like if they love the drummer, they can zero in on that angle and, just focus on that the whole time. So it's the idea of, instead of rather it being like a broadcast, it's more of a personalized cast for you. So I think, yeah, and also too, I think you touched on, they would have also cameras like backstage in the green room if you just wanted to like see what was going on and kind of get a peek behind the curtain, literally. I think all that's really interesting, and something that, a live stream that took place in the last year that I really enjoyed was Dua Lipa's live stream. And I think that one had an interesting distribution strategy. It was more
It did,
of,
yeah.
yeah, it was more of a live music video in terms of like the look and feel of the performance, which was great. They really, she really delved into the future nostalgia theme. But the distribution I thought was interesting because they had sort of tiered pricing in a way that encouraged fans to buy earlier. Because when you have a live stream experience, you're not, fighting for the first few rows. Whether you buy it day 1 or day 50, you get the same view at the end of the day. So I thought that was clever to encourage people, at least with pricing, to purchase earlier rather than at the last minute. And I know they did a VIP experience as well with a DJ set and pre-show sort of hang.
And specific merch that was
Specific
available
merch.
to higher tiered ticketing. Yeah.
Yeah. Something I've yet to see actually in the ticketed live stream space is some form of chat or some way to engage with other people who are watching. So just speaking from, in CASA, the a cappella association that I'm involved with, we've actually done a few virtual festivals over the last year. And during the concert portion of the events, my favorite part has always been seeing the chat and people just like, going wild, like, oh, that was great. Like you're just going wild in the chat. So I think that's something that's exciting to me too, at least in this hybrid model of, I'm watching by myself, but how do I feel connected to not only the artist who's playing, but also other people who are watching, who I might not necessarily know, they might be people that I would have things in common with or want to build community with.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the chat is, of course, the first thing that comes to mind there, but it can be very, very different. I mean, if I look at what we're going to do with Garden, then the whole idea of it being interactive and intimate is very important. And interactivity starts, I think, with a chat and with a shout out from the artist, and the shout out can come to people who, I don't know, tip or have a, pay more money or that sort of thing. Of course, that can be involved.
Yeah.
And what I'm also, sorry.
Oh, well, since you mentioned Garden, I don't know if that's what you were going to go into next, but I would love for you to share more about it and this exciting new venture that you're working on.
Yeah, well, so we talked about hybrid events right now and how that sort of, what you're really looking for when, especially post-pandemic, is how do I get somebody to stay at home and watch their screen, right? And you can do that by offering them a totally different experience than what they get by standing in a venue surrounded by other sweaty people, And yeah, one of the ways to do that is to, if you have like one of the big venues and, you don't have to spare too many costs on like cameras and everything, and you can really zoom in and maybe even give people the opportunity to decide whether they want to look at the bass player or the drummer or etc. And that the little thing about backstage, maybe with a little interview, getting a feel of how the band prepares for such a big show. And what we're going to do with Garden is to take that a little step further and really provide a different type of experience, right? So it won't ever feel like the band is standing on a stage and there's a camera pointed at it. Because if you want that experience and it's there, in a local venue, you would definitely go there. Whereas if you can give people a sense of intimacy, something that brings them much closer to the artist, brings them much closer maybe to fans as well, like you said, in very good quality, that I think will stay and be a big extra revenue stream within the music industry. And the fact that a company like Live Nation is on that as well with the acquisition of Veeps is kind of confirming that. Yeah, I mean, the Vimeo chat feature is indeed something that's great. What the Bandcamp one is good as well, because of the integration that Bandcamp has with merch already. Don't know if anybody's seen any Bandcamp live things yet, but it's nice because it just pops up in the chat that you buy the record or the T-shirt or something, you know, and then the artist can kind of go like, oh, this is great. But that has to come naturally to an artist, I think, right? That's that point about authenticity we talked about earlier. Don't you agree?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the Bandcamp feature is really cool, and I think has parallels to the sort of the online shopping space of sort of your modern day QVCs, whether it's somebody doing it like an Instagram live about a product. But yeah, I think that's really it plays on that idea of community, and I think when an artist, you know, sees that and recognizes that, that's when fans feel the authentic connection of that, like, thank you, like genuine gratitude of like, you know, you're the ones who are supporting me and, you know, are the reason why I'm able to do what I do and like make a living from it. So yeah, I think tools that enable that connection to happen more readily will only help both sides.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned Studio 2054, the Dua Lipa show, because when the big live stream started happening last year, what really struck me was, hey, why isn't there a windowing strategy? You know, why isn't this following the strategy of like the film industry, where something goes into cinema, then gets released on DVD, goes onto TV, etc., etc. And I wrote an article about that for Water and Music, by the way. But this idea of a waterfall strategy is actually something that's being implemented with the Dua Lipa show now, because they're going to try and bring it, you know, to different types of platforms, VOD platforms or TV, you know, pay TV platforms. So you kind of see that developing. And what that means, again, of course, is that the long tail, so to speak, of that video becomes much longer. And now I know that most artists don't have the Dua Lipa budgets, but that happens when on a much smaller scale as well. So if you look at what we'll do with Garden, is we'll have like a 40-minute live stream, but you can take a 15-minute segment out of that. You can take a 5-minute segment out of it for like a music video. You can do 90 seconds for Instagram. You can do 15 seconds for TikTok, etc. So you have to kind of think about that whole strategy, and that's really what we're going to focus on.
Awesome. Yeah, I love hearing you talk about Garden, because I think, you know, as a space for audio and visual recording, I think that provides a lot of value for artists. And something that we had talked about briefly was this idea of, during the pandemic, you know, we're used to seeing artists do promotional performances on your late night shows, your like Jimmy Kimmel's, things like that, Graham Norton in the UK, things like that. But because of the pandemic, which has limited travel and the ability to be there in person, a lot of artists have opted to record locally in studio spaces and send that video in, which, you know, from a management perspective, saves on cost and, you know, gives a certain level of control. And one of my favorites is actually seeing the NPR Tiny Desks from Home, which have been really cool to see, you know, in some instances, recreations of the NPR office, and then in other cases, really more produced, you know, full band sort of thing. So,
yeah, but
yeah.
Most of them kept the aesthetic of Tiny Desk. I love that. I mean, so for example, the Justin Bieber one totally lost it. and it could have been anything, you know. Whereas most artists kind of went into the tiny desk aesthetic, and I don't know if like NPR was trying to organize that with the artist as well, but I like that about it.
Definitely. I think the BTS one stood out to me because they had a band behind them, but all the guys were seated in the front, you know, dressed in beautiful color coordination, but it still felt very intimate. So I think, you know, we can talk about video because, you know, all this is video content, right? And different strategies around where does that go? What are the different ways to distribute it? But I think it's important. I'm sure most people know here that YouTube is actually one of the largest music streaming services because a lot of people go to YouTube to listen to music. So with, you know, whether it's a live stream performance in the vein of Dua Lipa that gets distributed later on to, you know, your like video on demand services, or if it's a docu-series, you know, multi-part docu-series on, you know, any of these platforms, there is a, you know, an appetite for that. I think we've seen a lot of music documentaries come out in the last few years as well on various streaming platforms, but, you know, it all goes back to like that authentic connection with the artist. Like people want to know what goes on behind the scenes in these artists' lives and what contributes to their art. So yeah, I think what you're doing is exciting and kind of taps into that spirit.
Yeah, exactly. We'll kind of, what we, and I know Arjen's here, but what we're really interested in is to see, or one of the things we're really interested in is to see how this is going to be a part of touring as well. Because basically, in an ideal world, we get an artist for 2 days. But I don't know what it's like in the US, but if like anything that isn't a minor artist, but anything that is sort of a mid-level to a big artist, they come to Europe and they go Amsterdam, Hamburg, Brussels, Berlin, London, Manchester, Madrid, and that's every day a new city, you know. And we kind of hope that we can build enough value into that to kind of say, no, oh, hang on, you're coming to Rotterdam for like 2 days to do this live streaming thing that will give you all of this other stuff as well with regard to video. Do you think that's realistic from a major AEG perspective of doing lots of big tours?
It's a good question. I mean, I think speaking to how what I know about the planning of tours is often you'll see in terms of scheduling, you'll see like a 3 in a row, 3 different cities in a row, and then a day off, 3 in a row and a day off, or sometimes multiple days off, depending on travel and routing and things like that. When it comes to building out something locally in a place like Rotterdam, I'm not familiar with the geography of distance between
Totally
you know,
fine.
places like Amsterdam, but I think, you know, I think maybe starting with the local artist community would be my, you know, what I would think of first of, okay, how do we build credibility with the local artist community and, you know, prove the model essentially, you know, look at all these great things that we've done locally, at least, you know, it can be, you know, Rotterdam and then, you know, Netherlands as a whole. And I think with that, it'll become sort of a destination for these artists once they know that, oh, this, you know, garden is really cool. Like I really want to prioritize that in my schedule. So then it becomes like, you know, something that people want to go after versus needing to, you know, convince somebody to make room for it. So that's how I would see it, knowing how busy touring schedules can be, because, you know, it's a balancing act of multiple things of, you know, scheduling, travel, you know, other priorities that the artist might have going on career-wise. So yeah, those are my thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Good to know. We're coming around to the hour, and we wanted to discuss those trends that we're most excited or curious about. So that's,
Yeah,
we can still do that, right,
touched on
Tom?
a
We could
few.
go over the hour. You said that was fine. So
Absolutely.
so yeah, maybe you go first, Angela.
Sure.
Touring, live streaming, trends that excite you, that make you curious.
Yeah, I mean, we touched on a lot of them. I think most immediately, I'm curious about this idea of a hybrid event and what it's going to materialize into. Because right now it's still mostly theoretical. Right now, I mean, we look at festivals like Coachella, they sort of have somewhat of a hybrid in that they have partnered with YouTube to stream Coachella live during previous years. And, that's more so kind of brand recognition for them because it's, it's accessible through YouTube. But I'm curious how it's going to evolve now that we've sort of had a year where it was completely virtual. What does it look like to mesh the two? And how does that experience become more engaging? So I think I'm most excited about that. Definitely curious about NFTs, but just my personal perspective, a little tired, a little tired of seeing so many different things come about. I think it's definitely interesting to see the directions that it's going in, but I think there's still a lot that is not fully understood around it. Something of course that I want to mention too is the environmental impact of, crypto blockchain technology, and with Earth Day also as well, and Earth, month too on the horizon. It's definitely a consideration that I think more people should be talking about, because right now it feels there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of, excitement. It's the new cool thing. But I think if we take a step back, just collectively, there's more development that I think needs to happen before it's, really viable. So yeah, those are the main ones for me. How about you?
So I think, if I can be really wild here, what I'm most excited and curious about is to see how virtual worlds like the metaverse is going to develop. And if you look at, there's so much information about Roblox right now because they just had that IPO, and that their daily users are there for like 3 hours a day on average, and that's insane, and what does it mean to have those experiences virtually? And they are social, that's what we know. So how will that develop? How will music play into that? Music is kind of kickstarting a lot of these things. Cheers, Nathan. And so most excited to see how that will develop and how kind of live music is going to play a big role in driving that, and seeing that further adopted more in a more mainstream way, I guess. Yeah.
Definitely.
I don't know if there's any questions that we needed to address. There was one from Trudy a while back about the VIP packaging during lockdown. Where was that? Done online. We kind of touched on that with
Dua Lipa.
Dua Lipa. Yeah, I had to think about Sam Smith as well, who did a big one, and it was cheap. I think it was like 12 euros, pounds, dollars, wherever you were in the world. But then it went up to like 250. And in the most expensive one, you got like extra access to an after show and special merch that was very specific to what was going on. And I think it's just getting kind of geared to super fans in that way.
Yeah, it's cool to see more artists I've seen more artists do like Zooms, whether it's group or one-on-one.
Yeah.
And in some ways that's actually a higher level of access than a meet and greet, which is usually, in a time crunch situation. So I think that's one sort of silver lining to the pandemic is, those Zoom interactions that wouldn't be possible without.
Exactly. Yeah. Just like this one. This
exactly.
would not be possible in Nashville,
Europe,
Tom.
Nashville. Exactly.
You're right. Well, guys, I'm afraid we're about out of time. Do you have any final remarks, Maarten or Angela?
Angela?
Just thank you, Tom, for having us here for Smartest People in the Room. It's a huge honor to be here and to talk with Maarten about all these interesting things that we're both very passionate about. So, and thank you to all the attendees for being here. I saw some familiar names in the chat and really appreciate everyone sharing, and especially sharing your ticketing stories. I love seeing that. So thank you again.
Yeah, likewise, just a big thank you, Angela, for doing this with me, Tom for having us, and everybody who attended for all your input and for listening.
Well, right on. Well, Maarten, we can't wait to learn more about your new platform, Garden, when it comes
Yeah.
out. In fact, post something. Is there a link or something you can put in the chat for everyone that wants to tap into
Yeah, this is
do
the
it
current
early?
website.
And Angela, thank you so much for your insights. I can't wait to see you both out in person at some point soon. Maarten, you're going to have to get on an airplane.
Yep.
Actually, we're all going to have to get on airplanes, but just suffice to say, we all are thirsting for live entertainment in any form. So I can't wait. To the audience, thank you very much for your attention and your patronage here. We've enjoyed having you, and we're going to be back here on Thursday with a couple more rock stars. Check out John Ozier and Randall Foster. With that, I'm going to sign off by simply saying be nice to each other and get a shot as soon as you can. Take care.
Take it easy, everyone.